Hey there, how is it going everyone? In this video, we're going to learn how to carry out Ajax with Flask. Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, which is a set of technologies that enable us to carry out asynchronous communication between the browser and the web server. So in this case, we having sending a form and then sending all the data with that form without having to do the page reload. So traditionally, a page is loaded, and a user can fill a form which sends a request to the server, but then the user has to wait for that response from the server after sending the form. However, for Ajax, when we send data with a form, the data is sent to the server behind the scenes, and whatever computation you are doing on the data is shown to us without having to do a full page reload. So in this video, we're going to be implementing Ajax using the fetch function. Other alternatives can be using the XML HTTP object and jQuery. For this video, I'm going to be carrying out Ajax with Flask. So to get started, I have my server set up at localhost 5000, and it basically has one route that renders our HTML page. So when we look into the route, we have our CSS file being linked to and also our JavaScript file. So inside our JavaScript file, we're having just a console.log which is going to return hello world. So if we are to see the demo application you're going to be building, so I'm going to go to localhost 5000. So this is what you're going to be building. We're having a form that when you add what you want to add, so I'm going to add some two figures. So and then say add, so it's going to submit this data to the server and then return an addition, a sum of these. So I can clear this. So such stuff can be done using traditional JavaScript. But however, if you want to do a computation on the server, we'll need to send this data to the server. So using Ajax, this form is sending this data to the server and then returning the requested computation as we have seen. So let's get building this. So I'm going to stop this running application. I'm going to go to the server and press Ctrl C. And so I'm going to stop this. So we're going to stop this, then we're going to run what we have. So I'm going to go to code, and I have my route. So I need to create another route. So before that, will need to go to our index.html. Now we need to create a form. So I'm going to create a form, and I don't need to have an action for now. So what I'm going to do is to just simply create my input. So I'm going to say this is going to have a label of let's say x, and it's going to be for x. Then I'm going to put in the input. So in this case, we're going to have an input of text, of number, because we need to add numbers. So this is going to be an input of numbers. So we shall call this x and also give it an ID of x. The next thing is going to be to create another input. So in this case, we're going to create the input. So we say label for y, then it's going to be y, and in this case I'm also going to create an input of type number. So we need numbers, so this is going to have a name of number and an ID of number. I'll use IDs as selectors in the JavaScript. So next thing I'm going to do is to create a button which is going to submit this data. So it's going to create a button, it's just a normal button. So we can even say it's going to be of type submit, so we can add the type of submit. So when we say this, this is going to be add. So if I refresh and go back to our app.py, so I'm going to open my terminal and run our server. So our server is going to run, and when we refresh, it is going to render our form. So we have x and y, and also have the add. So traditionally, when we are clicking on this form, it has to submit this data. That's why we're seeing that it's going to reload. So let's also add the heading. So I'm going to come and say h1, and this is going to be Flask Ajax demo. So in SF, we're going to have our form and our submit button. I'm also going to add another button that's going to clear. So I'm going to create another div. I'm going to give this div. So I'm going to say create a div with a class of result with an ID of result. Then after that, I'm also going to create another button which is going to clear this. So I'm going to create a button with an ID of clear, and this is going to just have the the value of clear. So when I save, I'm having this. Now do not mind about the layout for now. Now after doing this, I'm also going to add some styling. So I'm going to say that for everything we need to have a font family of, let's say, Helvetica sans serif. When I save that, we have that change taking place. So now the next thing in this case is to carry out the Ajax. Now, the Ajax simply occurs in our JavaScript. So we wrote a simple console.log and we linked our JavaScript file down before the ending body tag. So we're going to go and test whether this is working. So I'm going to open up my developer console. So I'm going to go to inspect and then go to console. So when I go this side, I see that hello world, which means that our JavaScript has been linked to our HTML file, which is good. So our template is now working with JavaScript. We're also having our CSS working with our JavaScript. Now let's go to the interesting things. So when you look at our inputs, I have an input with an ID of X and an input of ID Y. So I'm going to open up the index.js file and select them. So we're going to use the manipulation. So I'm going to select them by saying const X is going to be equal to document dot. This is going to be query selector. So I'm going to use query selector for this. Then I'll select based on the ID. So I'm going to say it's going to be ID of X and the ID of Y. So I'm going to say Y is going to be equal to document dot query selector. And in this case, we're going to select with the ID of Y. Now, after selecting this with JavaScript, I'll also select the form in which they are. So I'm going to say const form is going to be equal to document dot query selector. And in this case, I'm going to select the form. So when we select this form, what we want to do is that when you submit data with it, we do not submit this form. So I'm going to come and do is to add an event listener to the form. So I'm going to say form dot add event listener. So in this case, we're going to add an event listener of submit. When you submit this form, we want to call a function. So this function is going to take in an event e. So let me actually call it event. So when this form is submitted, what we want to do is we don't want this form to submit data. So we'll prevent that default behavior by saying event dot prevent default. Now after that, I'm going to save this, and when I go back to the browser, I'm going to refresh, and when I refresh, we see that the form does not reload the page once we submit data. Now the next thing will be to capture the inputs that have been input within the form. So we have X and Y. So to access those, we'll have to do, for now let's first do console log, and then we'll say X. To access the value of an input, we add that dot value. So I'm going to say X dot value. I'll do the same thing for Y. So I'll do console dot log. This is going to be Y dot value. And when I save, I'm going to go back to the browser. So I'll open up my developer tools. So I'll say inspect. When I go to console, so we have this. Now, if we are to input anything, let's say 12 and 13. So if I say add, this is supposed to console log, but let's try to refresh. When we try to do this, so we're going to add 12 and 13. So this logs them to the console, which means that our form is submitting. So what we need is to send this data using fetch to the server. So let's first check for the type of this. So we're going to check for the type of this. So I'm going to say type of, use type of in JavaScript to check for type. So I'm going to say type of, it's going to be type of, and I'm also going to console log type of. So type of. So when I save, this is going to, when you go back this side and refresh, we're going to add some data within the inputs. So when we add, we are seeing uncalled syntax error, missing argument after argument list. Let's see how this works. So say type of. What you want is to get these as numbers. So actually get them as numbers by saying that we need the x value as a number. So I'll say x value is equal to, in case it's a string, we're just going to say pass int. So we're going to pass them as integers, and we'll say x dot value. Then for the y value, we'll do the same thing. So we're going to do y value, and this is going to be pass int. So it's going to be pass int y, then dot value. So after this, what we're going to do is to basically send these two values to the server for computing. So after that, I'm going to come and create my fetch function. So the first thing I have to specify is the URL. So in this case, we want to send them to another route. So I'm going to create this route here. I'm going to come and create the route for the adding. So I'm going to say at app.route. Next thing I'm going to do is say that this is going to be our add route. So it's going to be a function that's going to add the numbers. And what it's going to do is to get the value of x. So you say that x is going to be for true. So we need to get the data as JSON. So I'm going to say data is going to be for true. Data dot request dot get JSON. So this basically gets the data as JSON. So we're going to get x as data dot get, and this is going to be x. So we're also going to get y being equal to data dot get y. So after this, what we're going to do is to just return, we're going to return the result. So we're going to return JSON, JSONify. So I'm going to import this. I'm going to come and import JSONify from Flask by saying import JSONify. Then I'll simply create a dictionary that's going to create the total. Let's call this the total. And what we'll need is the total. So in this case, we're going to say x plus y. So I'm going to save that. Server is going to restart. So when I go back this side, I'm going to use fetch to send a request to that URL. So I'm going to say const. I'm going to call this my URL, and it's going to be add. So it's going to send to /add because this page is being hosted on localhost 5000. Therefore, we do not, even if we don't specify the localhost 5000. So once you have this URL, the thing we shall do is to specify the request options. So I'm going to say let the request options be equal to, so this is going to be a dictionary, and it's going to have a method. The first thing is going to be the method. So you want to send this data via a post method. The next thing is going to be the header. So the headers is the information that explains to the server the details about the data. So we're going to say headers, and header is going to be an object that's going to contain the content type. So we're going to specify the content type, and in this case the content type is going to be application because we want to send JSON data to the server. So we're going to specify the application stroke JSON header as our content type. Then we're also going to specify that we'll be sending the content type as application to JSON. The next thing when you're sending a post request will be the body of the data we want to send. So the body in this case is going to be we need to send this in JSON. So we're going to say the body is going to be JSON.stringify. Then we're going to simply create an object that is going to have our x as the x value and the y as the y value. So when you have that, now let's try creating a request with fetch. So I'm going to say fetch So I'm going to pass in the URL first. So in this case, it's going to be the URL. Then you also need the request options. So we're going to pass in the request options. And after passing in the request options, it's going to return a promise. So then we expect to get a response. We expect to get a response, and then we expect to get this response in JSON. So we're going to say request.json. Another thing would be that we're going to access the data within the JSON. So we're going to say we're going to create a function that's simply going to log this data. So we're going to say data, and this is going to be simply logging the data in the console. So we're going to say console.log that data, and then then we need to catch these errors. So I'm going to say .catch. If we have any error, so I'm going to say error, then all we need is to just console log that error. So we're going to say console.log the error. So let's save this and go back to our file. So we're going to send a post request to the server using fetch every time we submit this form. So when I go back to our console and I refresh, everything is running all right. So when I add some data, I'm going to add 12 and 12. When I say add, it's going to send a request of post to our server. So when we see our server is saying that the post method brings a method of status code of 405, and this is showing us that we actually having our server sending to a route that does not allow this method. So to change this, we are going to go to our app.py, and what we'll do is to add the method. So we're going to say methods is equal to, in this case we want to send post methods only, so we're going to say post. So when I save, our server is going to restart, and when the server restarts, we're going to go back to our app. We're going to try to resend this data. So when we send this data, we see that we're getting our total as 24, which is wonderful. Now the next thing will be the way we're going to display this data on the front end. So we're going to simply come where we console log that data within our browser. Now remember, we're having our div with an ID of result. So having a div with an ID of result, and what we need is to add HTML that's going to show our computations. Now let's go and do that. So we're going to go to the index.html, and what we're going to do is where we log the data, instead going to return the following. So in this case, we're having our data returned as an object. So what you can access is the total from this data. So we're going to say what we need to do is to also select that div with an ID of result. So I'm going to say const. It's going to be result. It's going to be document dot query selector. So I'm going to select it and give it. It's going to be an ID of results. So let's go back and see it's an ID of result. So let's change that. It's going to come and say this is going to be an ID of result, and I'm going to save that. So when I come back this side, I'm going to say that when you have the data, instead of logging it in a console, what you're going to do is to render it. So I'm going to say results dot inner HTML. What we need is to add to the inner HTML. So we're going to add some HTML, and what we're going to do is get the X value. So we're going to say X value. So let's see. So this is going to be the X value, and then plus the Y. This is going to be the Y value, and it's going to be equal to so in this case we're going to say data.result. So let's see this working. So we're going to say data.result. So we're going to save and we go back to our client and we refresh. So we're going to add 12 and 12. When we add, we're having this returned, we're having an error somewhere. So when you go here, you can change this to the dollar sign using template literal. So I'm going to save and go back here. So when I refresh, when I add this, we're going to say 12 plus 12 is equal to undefined. Let's see where our error is. So I'm going to try to console log that data that's returned to see where the problem is. So I'm going to say console.log the data object. So I'm going to refresh again. When I say add, having the total as 24. So instead of saying data.result, we're supposed to say data.total. I'm going to refresh. So when I come and say add, it's going to say undefined. But when I refresh, so we're going to say is equal to 24, is equal to 24, and is equal to 24. Therefore, our server is being able to calculate and return the result, which is beautiful. However, we need to tidy this up, so I'm going to make this paragraph. So I'm going to say paragraph and close this also. So I'm going to come and add the closing tag. This is also going to be a paragraph and then save. For when I refresh, when you add 12 and 12, getting 24. When I add 12 and 25, we're getting 37. When I add 250 to 12, we're getting to 62. This is amazing. Now let's work on our clear button. So our clear button has enough functionality for now, but we can add an event listener as well. So I'm going to come and say, so did I even select it? I didn't, so I'm going to come and select it. So I'm going to come to clear. I'm going to go to the JavaScript and say const. This is going to be our clear button, and it's going to be equal to document dot query selector. So this is going to be it's going to be the ID of clear. So I'm going to select it with hash clear. When I select that, so I'm going to say clear button. I'm going to add an event listener to it. So it's going to be an event listener of click. So it's going to have a callback function. So this callback function is going to, what it's going to do is to just set the results inner HTML to none. So we're going to say results.inner HTML is going to be equal to an empty string. I'm going to save this and then refresh. So when I close my developer console, hoping everything is going fine, I'm going to add 12. So when I add, it's going to bring 24. So I'm going to remove this. Let me change this to 25. So I'm going to say 25, and then this is going to also be 25. This is going to return 50, which is good. So when I return 35 plus 25, this is going to return 60, which is good. So if I press the clear button, this is going to clear our output. However, I also need to reset this form. So I'm going to come to this, and after setting our values, so I'm going to just say form dot reset. So let's see how this is working. When we refresh, when we add, this is going to bring our result. So when I add 12, let me say 0, so it's going to return 12, and our form is working as expected. So we can do as many computations as we like, then add. So we have 246, which is fine. So in this video, we've learned how to carry out Ajax with Flask and learned how we can be able to use JavaScript on the client side so as to send requests to the server without doing full page reloads. If you feel you've learned from this video, please go ahead and like this video and as well share it with someone. And if you like this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching.